This is Article 3, it's part of the Commission rules, and it was specific to the taking and handling of wildlife. And we have a couple parameters that we look at these rules through. Some of them are mandated per law, and also there are some specific criteria that the governor's office wanted us to look at as we go through these proposed changes. And we have some of them here. Kind of the cornerstones that we looked at this rulemaking process from our fair chase, which is based on our commission's policy on fair chase, clarifying language so it's more understandable to the public, protecting public property rights, and also trying to reduce regulatory burdens whenever possible. And one of the key components that we looked at this rule through was this concept of fair chase. And hunt hard, hunt fair, and we were trying to incorporate that in how we looked at this particular article. And it's based on three major components, and mostly around emerging technology. So I'll just go ahead and read it. Criteria used to evaluate whether or not a new technology or practice is a fair chase issue. So like I said, there are three major components that we looked at. Does the technology or practice allow a hunter or angler to locate or take wildlife without acquiring necessary hunting and angling skills or competency? Does the technology or practice allow a hunter or angler to pursue or take wildlife without being physically present or pursuing wildlife in the field? And does that technology or practice making harvesting wildlife almost certain, and/or the technology or practice prevents wildlife from eluding detection and/or take? And so I'm going to start to go through, like I'd already mentioned, these are the sort of the same main tenets that we looked at, both per governor's office guidance as well as the commission's desire to look at fair chase issues in this article. And so I'll kind of start from the beginning. We'll start with some of the definitions that we've clarified, beginning with the definition of edible portions of game meat. It just clarified a little bit more what we consider to be edible portions of game meat. So for upland game birds, migratory birds, and wild turkey would be the breast. For bear, bighorn sheep, bison, deer, elk, javelina, mountain lion, and pronghorn antelope, front quarters, hind quarters, loins or back straps, including neck meat, and also tenderloins. And for game fish, it would be fillets of the fish. Furthermore, this was again is something that our commission asked us to clarify is the use of drones. And technically they were already considered aircraft, but our commission directed us to just make it very clear that drones are considered wildlife, and they would be included with the restrictions on wildlife as far as it relates to hunting. Correct. I'm sorry. Yes, drones are considered aircraft. Some more of the definitions we just clarified for artificial flies and lures to prohibit the use of chemical and organic attractants. This will be more relevant. We'll spend a lot more time on this later, but this is a definition that we came up with for live action trail camera. A live action trail camera means an unmanned device capable of transmitting images, still photographs, video, or satellite imagery wirelessly to a remote device, such as but not limited to a computer, smartphone, or tablet. This does not include a trail camera that only records photographic or video data and stores the data for later use, provided the device is not capable of transmitting data wirelessly. The next one is just to clarify the single point barbless hook. There was some confusion with that. The department proposed to amend the rule to define single point barbless hook to address fish mortality issues, particularly involving trout, because they tend to gulp gulp the hook deeper, resulting in high loss mortality, and sometimes up to 90%, and limits their ability to be released unharmed, depending on whether the hook is removed from the line or cut. So basically, the two images there, there was some confusing between a treble hook and a hook. So it's the one on, it would be my left. It's a single point barbless hook, does not include the treble hook, which has the 3 points. Also, we went through and clarified some of the definitions that was in the rule. Also added some definitions that were not defined previously, just to make it more clear to the public. This is some of the examples of the either new definitions or clarifying existing definitions if they existed before. This is another one. This is going to be relevant when we start talking more about trail cameras. So this is a definition of a developed water source. A developed water source means a developed place or man-made structure that collects or stores water with the primary purpose of providing water to wildlife or livestock. This is dealing with an amendment to the existing crossbow permit. This is actually in a different article, but we're able to address it because the proposal is to add an additional weapon type to that permit. So what the permit does, and there was some confusion on this, and I'll spend a little bit of time on trying to clarify that. The permit, with this permit, a person may use a pre-charged pneumatic weapon using arrows or bolts for the take of wildlife during an archery season. And again, that is only in regards to the crossbow permit as an alternative to the existing crossbow. So it's just a separate weapon type that would be allowed. And just to clarify, it is only as it pertains to the crossbow permit. It doesn't apply to any other archery seasons. And just a little bit of background on that proposal. When we looked at the two weapons, we felt that they were very comparable as far as the accuracy, the distances, and with their effective as well as feet per second. We felt it was equivalent weapon type, and it also is easier and safer to manipulate, particularly with a person with a qualifying disability. Next is smart devices, which we also helped define, and also just wanted to clarify. These are precision guided weapons, and basically setting some parameters that if they have the capability of actually helping to control the trigger using a computer, that would be a restriction placed on this particular type of weapon. Again, just clarifying, there was some confusion in existing language in the rule, but what this did is it clarified the use of full jacketed ammunition as it related to hunting. The confusion lies because some of these products actually said for hunting use on them, and the current language specified for military use. So we just expanded that and clarified the definition. It's that fully jacketed ammunition that is designed to expand or to not expand on impact would be prohibited, which was the intent of the original rule. And just to clarify that. Also, too, just further clarification as it pertained to different weapon types and projectiles. A person shall not use or possess any of the following while taking wildlife: poison projectiles or projectiles that contain explosives or a secondary propellant. Also, another rule that we've imposed, which is very similar to the statute that prohibits the discharge of a firearm within a quarter mile or 440 yards of a dwelling. So I'll just go ahead and read the definition and the rule change. In addition to the prohibitions prescribed under ARS 17301 and 17309, the following devices, methods, and ammunition are unlawful for taking a wildlife in this state. A person shall not by any means discharge an arrow or bolt while taking wildlife within 1/4 mile, 440 yards of an occupied farmhouse or other residence, cabin, lodge, or building without permission of the owner or the resident. And that was addressed some of these issues that we've been having in several communities throughout the state. So we hope that will clarify and address some of those issues. And this one is pertaining to trail cameras. There are two different types that we're proposing to add restrictions to. The first one, and I'll just go ahead and read it, restrict the placement of live action cameras. A person shall not use a live action camera, trail camera, or images from a live action trail camera for the purpose of taking or aiding in the take of wildlife, or locating wildlife for the purpose of taking or aiding in the take of wildlife. The second was a person shall not use any trail camera or images from a trail camera for the purpose of taking or aiding in the take of wildlife or locating wildlife for the purpose of taking or aiding in the take of wildlife within 1/4 mile, 440 yards of a developed water source. And that was the definition that I mentioned earlier. Secondly, there was also some confusion based on some of the comments we've been receiving on a restriction that we are proposing to place on satellite type devices. So I'll go ahead and read that, and then I'll try to clarify a little bit more what its intent and purpose was. A person shall not use images or a person shall not use images of wildlife produced or transmitted from a satellite or other device that orbits the Earth for the purpose of taking or aiding in the take of wildlife or locating wildlife for the purpose of taking or aiding in the take of wildlife. And again, there was some confusion. It's not intended to include mapping systems, for example, like Google Earth or some of the other products that are out there. It wasn't intended for that. It was more to try to get ahead of emerging technology that could potentially produce images from a satellite that could have the visual quality to be able to identify individual animals. Also, the next one here is, 12-4-304. I'll allow the use of pre-charged pneumatic weapons using arrow bolts with broadheads. Again, just the requirements: no less than 7/8 inch in width, with metal, ceramic coated, or ceramic cutting edges, and capable of firing a minimum feet per second. So we're establishing a standard for that. And also, when we looked the previous language, simply qualified as a metal cutting edge, and it didn't allow for different types of broadheads. So when we looked at these other products that are out there and felt that they were appropriate, so this rule was intended to address that. Again, this is just to clarify that the ceramic coated or ceramic cutting edges were now authorized. Previously, this rule was we looked at previously 5 years ago. Pre-charged pneumatic weapons were authorized for big game. However, the commission chose not to include bison or elk. However, 5 years has passed, and when we looked at these weapons that are out there, felt that they were appropriate for adding to the list elk and bison with a couple of requirements. One of which being a minimum caliber of 40 caliber and a minimum foot-pounds of energy of 500 pounds. For fishing permits, this was more just to make it a little bit more inclusive. This permit was specific to organizations that had licensing or contract with Department of Economic Security. And it was very limited on who could apply and receive this permit for group fishing activities. So basically, it just replaced that, so it's not a requirement. It also removed the 20-person limit, and then just a couple other requirements to provide a copy of their Articles of Incorporation and mission statement, and that they have a lesson plan and curriculum outline included in their application. And again, this was just some clarifying language. Language established the Commission's authority to limit artificial flies and lures, season to use a single point barbless hook. And again, it was just to create some consistency between the rule package and the Commission orders. The next one here is 314. It's possession, transportation, import of aquatic wildlife. It did allow for an opportunity to add some live native bait fish to the list of bait species that can be used. We also streamlined some of these bait fish regulations. We eliminated some and combined them to get a little more clear and consistent. And again, this just relates to the drone, and the 320 is the article or the rule that deals with aircraft. And so does, as well as 319, again, just clarifying that drones are aircraft. And then lastly, this was just clarifying distance and restrictions in county parks and towns, distance where hunting activities can occur. And so that doesn't include all of the changes. Many other ones are just clarifications, so we didn't include all of them. They are, however, available on our website, and we intend to provide that in a press release after this meeting, so you can go look at the actual rule language and all the proposed changes. And so we'll put that out as soon as we can. And so what we'd like to do now is we have a couple members in the audience that have some questions and or comments, so we would like to take them now. And then as well, we have a number of comments and or questions from the public that had submitted them via email. So with that, I'll take some questions and or comments. You can.
Reason I'm here is the trail cam issue. I run trail cams with or without a tag. So it's a treasure hunt. Been doing it for about 4 years now. And I think Game and Fish is going to be creating a quagmire by doing the quarter mile from any designated water source. Because what happens is at a quarter mile, you're just going to have 3 times the cameras. So if you got 10 cameras on a water hole, you're going to have 30 at a quarter mile, and they're going to give birth to Sodom and Gomorrah outfitters, because there's going to be pillars of salt everywhere, and I don't think that's going to be enforceable. I mean, how do you enforce all that around all those water holes? I think the easiest suggestion, or the best suggestion, would be, I know you said you guys have already considered this, was doing the no-fly rules. So 48 hours before, say, the archery deer hunt, the big game deer hunt, you shut down the cameras. People have to pull them off the water holes or whatever, and then eliminates a lot of issues. Even fights of people driving up to a water hole in, say, Unit 9 or other units that they allow them, and creating conflict. I think it would lessen some of the conflict that way. And of course, the Arizona Strip is probably a big deal too, as far as that goes. But I think it's a great proposal to do no-fly rules on all trail cams, and we still get to have fun with our treasure hunts and looking at the animals through the year. Thank you.
I want to make sure we captured your comments, and I think you had mentioned you had sent a letter previously as well, or an email.
I've done 3 or 4
okay.
contacts to different people, and I'm going to write letters to the
Okay. Perfect. So we'll capture it there as well, and so just a little bit of background on how we came up with this proposal. And trust me, there were lots of iterations, but part of this is trying to be clear and consistent, and making it understandable to the public. So say for example the quarter mile rule is consistent with some of the other rules like camping on water, discharge of a firearm, those types of things. It's most people understand those rules and understand that distance. But the issue that we've dealt with is the significant tie that wildlife has to water. And then if you look at the Commission's policy on fair chase, many of those components apply to it, because it's a very they're tied to that water, and there's a high likelihood they're going to capture that image. And the thought process there is that could be an unfair advantage for that animal. They don't know they're being detected. They're going to come to that water, and then that we felt was an issue through our Commission's fair chase policy. So that's part of it. And we did look at things that you talked about similar to the aircraft rule, but again, it's trying to be understandable to the public. There's lots of seasons out there. And so that was a lot of the rationale, was trying to make it as clear as possible. And as far as the enforcement goes, it's just like any other rules that we have. It's incumbent upon our officers to build a case, to get the information, to find all of the totality of the circumstances, the intent to build a case. And we understand that's difficult, but we do it on lots of other rules as well. So we know it's going to be a challenge, but our intent, and it's really intended to protect fair chase, and that was the one that we felt was a balanced approach, and we didn't want to be overly regulatory. And the other component is that we have to stay within our authority. You know, so at one point in time we talked about total bans and other things, but you know, we have to keep in our authority, which is the take and handling of wildlife, managing wildlife. So if you start getting into other things, you can't put them here for any purpose. That was a bit beyond our authority. And then also just to clarify, as long as you're not using these images or the technology to take wildlife, it's not unlawful. So if you're not using it for that purpose, then it's not unlawful. Is that clear? No? Okay.
That doesn't make sense. So if I have a tag, all I have to do is get my buddies to go around cameras.
That is covered because it's aid. It's aid intake. So if your buddy takes a picture of one and then submits it to you, and then you go out and take that animal, that would be a violation because that is a component of aid in the take. And again, you know, we. You know, I don't want to go into all these, you know, the different scenarios because there would be 1,001 and we'll be here all night. But again, we will approach the enforcement of it as like we would with any other rule. It's, you know, it'll be incumbent upon the officer, you know, to gather the information, you know, build your reasonable suspicion, probable cause, and proceed accordingly. Sure, I'm sorry.
Okay, so how is it affecting the wildlife when we take them down 48 hours before a hunt? So how is that affecting taking an elk, say, per chance? And elk season isn't till mid-September. The cameras have been pulled, say, latest August 23rd, because 24th is the start of archery deer this year. So there's no unfair advantage there, period. The unfair advantage, if you're going to go that far, then the unfair advantage is don't let them set a water hole. See, it doesn't make sense. You guys are coughing at one thing and swallowing the camel on the other. You see what I'm saying? So if they're down by the 23rd of August or 48 hours before the big game archery hunt, then the animal, there's no unfair advantage there. So what you said doesn't make sense.
Just capture that as content. Yep. Thank you.
You know what I mean? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
My comments about the air bow. Only thing that in common with a bow is it projects an arrow. There's no string on it. The effective yardage is out to almost 300 yards currently, and it's a new product, so where's it going to go from here? I'm strongly against it. We just used the term of fair chase. It doesn't seem like it's fair chase for the archery season. I understand it's for champ tags, but you got a claw. They could hold a crossbow. They could use it that way. I have a friend that's missing an arm, and he shot elk that way. I just don't agree with it, and I'm strongly opposed of it. Thank you.
And again, just to a little bit of background on how we came up with the proposal. And again, I get your points about its dissimilarities to other archery equipment. But when we looked at it and just felt with, you know, what's already currently authorized and has been for a long time is the crossbow, and we felt that it was comparable. They're not exactly the same. But they are comparable in some of the accuracy and the feet per second that both of them do. So that was the comparison, and then also it provides a better opportunity with a person with a qualifying disability because it's the ease of use of manipulating, putting the arrow, taking it out as a benefit to a person with a qualifying disability. And then just also to clarify, you know, the rules that go along with that, they have to get, there's an application that a qualified healthcare provisioner has to sign off on that they have that disability. So that's where it came from.
So we have a huge drug epidemic right now that these same people are signing off every day on drugs. What's the difference of signing off for a air rifle shooting an arrow? You know what I mean? It's probably people have worn out arms because they were a pitcher or something. They could probably qualify for that. Able-bodied person, but their shoulder's a little bad. I mean, what's the next thing? A rocket launcher with fletching on it? You know, call it an air rocket? I don't know. It's just, like I said, strongly opposed.
Thank you. And again, although this process will be hopefully ending soon, but also, it's an ongoing process. If issues are identified through the next 5 years, like you're saying, it's being abused, those things can be addressed, in the next 5 years. So it's never quite over, but, certainly we'll be monitoring and looking for those types of issues.
So I'm going to piggyback on both gentlemen, actually. I'll first touch on the air rifles, pre-charged pneumatic rifle. I stand with the Arizona Bow Hunters Association on their opposition to that. Once again, I believe an air rifle is essentially a rifle. It is capable of killing way beyond the capabilities of a crossbow. And I agree with this gentleman here that the medical marijuana laws that are out there and the doctors that see it easy enough to sign off on anyone getting a medical marijuana card could also be easily influenced to authorize a champ permit for anybody. And now you're turning an archery deer season into a rifle deer season. And you want to talk about fair chase, which I'll touch on in just a second. All of a sudden, what kind of fair chase is it? And just like he said, a pitcher that threw his arm out. I've had shoulder surgery twice. My doctor would probably sign off of it, even though I draw a compound bow. So where do we draw the line fair chase? So, and then to address fair chase itself, I'm curious how, and I'm trying not to sound disrespectful. So there are organizations, hunting organizations worldwide, Safari Club International, Buckmasters, Pope and Young, Boone and Crockett, North American Hunting Club, Dallas Safari Club, that have all agreed upon rules of fair chase. And now all of a sudden, Arizona Game and Fish Department, which I've had a hunting license for 30 years at this point in time. All of a sudden, Arizona Game and Fish Department comes through and says, well, we don't care what everybody else says. We say fair chase is this. I'm curious where this committee thinks they can usurp and overrule what the general knowledge of fair chase is compared to every other hunting organization essentially around the world, if not at least in the country. State of Montana did a ban outright on trail cameras, period. And they did, I believe it was a blackout period prior to hunts. After that, they came through just this last year and said, you know what, we take it back. Trail cameras are allowed, no live action trail cameras. And I understand the live action trail cameras, absolutely. Hey, guess what? I just got a text that there's elk in this water hole. Let's sneak in there and try and kill one. Now, I think that is a little absurd to think that a hunter can sneak in on a water hole around 30, 40 eyes of elk and actually pull off a shot, but I believe it has happened, so I can understand that. So the fair chase issue, I'm curious how fair chase could be determined arbitrarily by a state and what kind of precedence that's going to set throughout the industry, throughout game and fish departments, throughout hunting organizations. So that's the second point I wanted to make. The third point I wanted to make is, and I'm sorry if I'm going a little long here, if that's okay, is the actual verbiage of the trail camera restriction. It is, and I have it here, I want to read it. A person shall not use any trail camera or images from a trail camera. So let's just take out that first portion. A person shall not use images from a trail camera for the purpose of taking or aiding wildlife within 1/4 mile of an outer perimeter of a developed water source. Do you see the gray area? I can't use images from a trail camera to take wildlife within 440 yards of a water source. So I put my camera at 441 yards and it tells me there's a buck that comes by occasionally. Great. Now I set up a water blind or a ground blind on that water and I use that picture to take an animal within 440 yards of that water hole. What did I just do? I broke the law, even though my camera was 441 yards away. Based on that gray area of the law and the way it's written, I just broke the law and I'm now losing my hunting rights. Do you see the gray area? That's essentially, I'll leave it at that. I've submitted a few comments. I'm hoping those do get around the commissioners. I'm hoping it does make a dent. When the proposal was 100 yards from a water source, I was a little more understandable of that. I do believe that humans walking around at 441 yards from around a water catchment or a water tank is more of a negative impact on wildlife than popping in, check a trail camera, pop out. Sure, you've got the dirt bags that run up in their quads and everything, and they shouldn't be there. I get that. So I don't see how this is less impactful. I think it's going to be more impactful on natural wildlife movement to water. I think it could have more negative ramifications than positive. And then lastly, just because you have a trail camera picture of a deer doesn't guarantee you anything. I have thousands of trail camera pictures of deer, elk, antelope, bighorn sheep, rabbits, squirrels, and I've killed one elk in all these years I've been running trail cameras. It doesn't guarantee anything. It absolutely does not guarantee anything. Anyone who says they can 100% pattern a deer or pattern an elk based on a trail camera picture is lying to you or is full of himself. I don't know anybody that has constantly said, oh, I had that camera with that deer on that picture every third day between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. There are too many influences in wildlife that can determine when they get water, when they don't get water. How hot is it? Is it raining? Is it cold? Is there water everywhere else? Barometric pressure, wind movement. And then there's that. Just because I got a trail camera picture that says that deer's there every day at 11 a.m., I show up, pop a ground blind in or a tree stand, wind movement, he's going to smell me. Doesn't guarantee I'm going to kill that deer. None of it does. Now, judging by your conversations you're having in your replies to us, it sounds like this is already a done deal, and all this conversation is falling on deaf ears. I hope that's not the case, and the public has an opportunity to make some impact in this, to either back off this restriction or retable it for another year, or maybe reduce that length of 440 yards to 100 yards, if nothing else, than to lessen the impact on wildlife. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you, sir.
And I probably won't go back through all of that, but just a couple of things for clarification. As far as the rule, and again, this isn't final. That's why we're accepting comments. It's not final until the commission has approved it and GERC has approved it. So it's not final, and we are collecting, and that's why we're here. We're collecting all this information. There are new comments still coming in. So yes, we're looking at all of that, and there certainly could be some refinements to some of the language because we understand some of it is still a bit confusing. But just to the one point, the restriction is the placing the camera. If you took, it's using the image to take the wildlife. The camera is 440 yards. As long as it's beyond that, it's legal. And using the image to take the wildlife, if you did it within 440 yards, that would be unlawful. So
that is not clear in the verbiage.
Yeah, so that is certainly something we could look at refining, but that's the intent, was to restrict it within that, just the use of the camera within the 440 yards. And then as far as the fair chase component, that is something that our commission developed, so that's within their authority, and they developed that policy. So it's the Arizona Game and Fish Commission policy that they felt was relevant to Arizona, and it's largely dealing with the North American model of wildlife conservation, and it does deal a lot with emerging technology and trying to get ahead of that, because our concern is that can impact impact the fair chase principles. If we don't do something, it can get further and further out and from us. So that's the intent and why they established the policy, and they're going to know what's best for Arizona, and we're a very unique state, as you well know. So that is a lot of where their policy comes from. It's very specific to Arizona. And then, I think we have the rest of your comments, and you provided other letters as well. Okay, I assume. Yep.
Just to touch on the North American model of wildlife conservation, is that not to harvest mature animals to allow younger ones to mature, which is what trail cameras do? Trail cameras absolutely give the opportunity to find out what has the most mature animals and what areas don't, and so that a hunter can focus on one area versus another. So that was just a brief touch on the North American model of wildlife, simply because you brought it up. And then finally, this is just kind of this one just kind of really eats in the back of my head here, because you touched on it with Mr. Josiah here, that if you're just a wildlife watcher and you're putting a camera up and you take pictures and you just enjoy looking at those pictures, you like that just having the wildlife pictures or whatever, having a collection of them. That's wonderful, and that's legal, and that's fine. Does that essentially make an animal activist legal to put a camera on a water hole, yet the hunters who donate all the money to the wildlife, who pay for the tags, pay for the wildlife, pay for the management of the wildlife, can't? That just seems like a slap in the face, kind of a bite the hand that feeds you thing. Is if you think about it, anybody who doesn't hunt can now do whatever they want still, and hunters would not be allowed to. And it just seems a little ludicrous to me. So that's my final comments, sir. Thank you for your time.
Okay, I think we got that as well. And then I think that's all that we had here present. So we're going to try to take some of the email questions that came in.
One thing I would like to point out that is we only have the authority to enforce hunting regulations, so that kind of ties our hands when it comes to recreational use. We have no authority to implement rules or control that. So that's why that's not addressed in the rules. We would if we could, but we don't. From Mike Ornosky, it says, I am against the proposed rule change to restrict game cameras within 1/4 mile for the taking of wildlife. The rule is poorly written and not enforceable. It singles out hunters who may have an interest to pursue, but allows everyone else to be legal to set game cameras at man-made water establishments. It will create confusion, increase theft, as individuals will assume all game cameras are illegal within a water source. Additionally, it will make hunters who hunt on water that do not or have placed a camera on their desired water guilty by association. The wildlife officer will have to assume everyone hunting water is guilty if there is a camera there. This will create written tickets for not guilty legal hunters. So it's a statement, not really questions. Matt Smith, I have submitted comments regarding the proposed restriction of trail cameras within 1/4 mile of water sources. While I agree with restrictions on satellite or electronically transmitted images and files, I completely disagree with the proposed rule regarding cameras near water sources. Please explain specifically how a camera placed near a water hole violates the fair chase doctrine. As a hunter, this is a valuable tool to locate where game may be prior to and possibly during a hunt. These cameras are placed months prior to hunts and checked every couple of months when a hunter has a chance to travel to the unit and retrieve the images. Often weather, food sources, and travel patterns change, and the images from one point in time do not provide any guarantee an animal will be there during an actual hunt. If the animals are present during the hunt, the hunter still must possess the skills, patience, stealth, marksmanship, and even a little luck to harvest. Sometimes water source does not even hold water anymore. Many hunters hunt units that are far from their residence and do not have the time or financial means to spend extended periods scouting all the areas of their unit. What is the definition of developed water source?
And to start with the last one, we did. I can read it again just for clarity, but that we did define that up front.
This was sent in before we started, so he's
Okay.
probably heard the definition, but
Okay, then we
maybe
can-
explain specifically how a camera placed near a water hole violates the fair chase doctrine.
And so if you look at these are the couple of the tenets that we talked about. And again, it's specific to Arizona and the, the significant tie that wildlife have to these water sources. And in many cases, there is not available water elsewhere. And so there's a high likelihood that these animals are going to get water at these sources. And, with the availability of cameras being there, is a high likelihood that they're going to get the image. They're going to get, they'll be able to identify it. They'll be able to, you have a time and date stamp. And then I know you mentioned patterning, but, we believe that is something that can occur that we felt was an unfair advantage over wildlife. And then again, that ability to be able to locate that wildlife using this technology is again felt to be compromising that fair chase component that our commission has provided. And so I get there's a disagreement on that, but that we feel was important specifically because of the significant tie that wildlife has to water. And then as far as the distance, again, that was to be consistent with some of our other rules that people are pretty well understand fairly well.
He has another question. If the department recommends or condones this hunting technique, which is the tree stands and hunting near water, he says, why is a game camera without wireless transmission capabilities placed in these areas an issue? If game cameras are allowed in a water hole as a legal area to hunt, it seems like this rule is a little capricious.
Again, it's the use of that technology and the information that they can provide that would be tied to take.
And then he asked, does the department intend to restrict scouting and/or hunting near water holes as well? That would be no.
Yes, that would be a no.
Well, I mean, if I may, you scoff at it, but there's a precedent. There are private ranches in the state of Arizona that put policies out there: no game cameras on water, no game cameras period, no hunting around water, no approaching water. So if this is the first thing to go, what's next? Is now sitting on a tree stand, that ambush technology, is that not fair chase anymore? Setting a ground blind on water, is that no longer considered fair chase because they are so tied to water, in your words? So.
And again, this was tied to technology. We're talking about trail cameras, so it's the use of that technology.
So under this rule package, it's not a recommendation that the department has made to the commission. And it wasn't, we didn't evaluate hunting near waters because it wasn't a concern that was brought up under fair chase or by any other comments that we received internally or externally.
Austin Atkinson. Does the department believe that the use of trail cameras at developed water sources violate fair chase hunting ethics? I think you've answered that. Does the department intend to use their own trail cameras within a quarter mile of water sources for their own purposes and research? And if so, how would a sportsman know whether they should report the department's trail camera placement?
And to answer that one, we would still use them, but again, it'd be the tie is the taker and the A to take. It depends on what we were doing. I think we talked about earlier on that there some of the other rules have exceptions for research or department purposes or things like that. That's something we could still address. However, what was the second part?
How would a sportsman know whether they should report the department's trail camera placement?
And again, that's going to be the the discretion of an officer. It's hard to, dictate whether that one, we know that if, you're not going to be able to look at a camera and tell if they're using it for take or not. We understand that. But again, it's the same thing as, we can't go beyond our authority and just ban them everywhere all the time. So we have to tie it to take. So again, that's going to be incumbent on getting information and building a case or not. If it's not a violation, it's not, or we don't have enough information. And so, if we get a report, we'll follow up on it like we would for any other rule.
Does the department believe that all trail cameras should have proof of ownership, registered serial numbers, or the like to allow for an individual to be prosecuted when a camera is in violation of the rule?
And we did, that is something that our team did look at. But again, part of our mandate, we didn't want to add additional regulatory burdens, and also just the administrative function of trying to require people to have a registration process or tagging process or something like that. That was something we felt was a little beyond reasonable in requiring that of the public to do, and potentially thousands and thousands of cameras.
What course of action would a department officer take when a violator's trail camera is located within a quarter mile of water? Would it be possible to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the individual was indeed the owner of the camera?
And again, that is, as I had mentioned before, we would approach it like we would any other case based on the information that you have, the totality of the circumstances during interviews, during any other information that was provided during an open case. And it's, every case is going to be different, so it's difficult to get into that. But the bottom line, it would be approached like any other case that the department would have.
From Tony Martins, current commercial airbows are .357 caliber pneumatics. Does this mean they are not going to be legal for the take of elk and bison with the .40 caliber rule? As the now defined equivalent of the crossbow, they should be legal.
One more time.
Current commercial airbows are .357 caliber pneumatics. Does this mean they are not going to be legal for the take of elk and bison with the .40 caliber rule? As the now defined equivalent of the crossbow, they should be legal.
Okay, and so to answer, the minimum was established at .40 caliber, but that was the .40 caliber is specific to the pre-charged pneumatic that shoots the bullet.
Yes, for elk and bison.
Yes.
For the record, current commercial airbows are the functional equivalent of crossbows. They are not 300-yard weapons in his opinion, and he has more experience using airbows for hunting than almost anyone else on earth. Arizona Bowhunters Association's opinion is simply an opinion and certainly not based on any factual information. Statement. He says airbows are not only easier for disabled to use, they are also safer to use and will encourage truly disabled individuals who have quit hunting to give these weapons a try. The fact that physicians give anyone who asks a disability authorization has absolutely nothing to do with airbows. So here's her statements. From Mike Elson, just my 2 cents worth. I can see no scientific or moral problem with the use of regular trail cameras on water sources. A prohibition on Wi-Fi-enabled cameras should have some merit, but with the lack of cell signal in much of the Arizona backcountry, I can't see it as a big problem. Trail cameras are a tool that guarantee the user nothing. Like a fish finder can show you where fish are but can't make them bite, a game camera can show you some of what has used the water source in the past, but is no guarantee that the game will be back. Even the Pope and Young Club, which has been pretty, I won't say it, on a fair chase issues, don't seem to have a problem with them. The theft issue is a problem, but hey, you pay your money and you take your chances. Going to Unit 9 or the Strip and seeing a dozen cameras on water holes is ridiculous, but doesn't faze the wildlife. I personally am at an age where I can't hike the hills like I once did, so hunting water is important to me. Make no mistake, we'll all be there eventually. I just like to have some idea what's using a water hole before I commit to spending valuable and limited time on a sit. I also enjoy running the cameras year-round just to see what's out there. Most folks I know feel about the same way I do. I have heard some who are different or actually opposed, but I hate to see anything that divides hunters. Just as an aside, the proposed ban looks to me like it would be an enforcement nightmare. Are the already stretched thin wildlife managers going to spend all their time afield trying to inventory and monitor all water holes in their unit? My opinion, take a closer look at the use of Wi-Fi enabled cameras, but leave the others alone. From Ben Shelby, the proposed rule change for cameras, specifically 1/4 mile away from water, is being considered based on what? Is there any biological data that suggests the trail cameras within 1/4 mile of water has negative impacts to wildlife? Does a trail camera within 1/4 mile have a significant increase to hunter harvest? Will it improve hunter recruitment? Does unlawful trail cameras within 1/4 mile improve game laws so your constituents better understand? The department has done a great job managing our state's wildlife, and I'm a proponent of fair chase. Cellular trail cameras take away an outdoorsman's time in the field, and I am against it. However, the millennial generation and younger are our future. The use of trail cameras should help inspire the younger generation to get a field. By creating more laws, it deters the younger generation from participating. If there is biological data that supports the rule change to ban trail cameras 1/4 mile away from water due to negative impacts, then please provide that data. Working closely with several local wildlife managers, the decision to ban trail cameras comes from a social management concern. I hope the department will make decisions based on science-based management.
And then just to cover the top portions or several of those questions, again, this proposal was, again, based on the fair chase policy. And so that was the rationale behind the proposal.
Is the new 1/4 mile regulation, this is from Darren Boyd, is the new 1/4 mile regulation backed up by data or a rule being made just because of the fair chase assumption? It doesn't make sense to say it's fair chase to be able to sit water and hunt but not be able to have game cameras on water. I'm strongly opposed to this regulation to ban game cameras from within 1/4 mile of water holes. I don't want the gray area text refined. I want the regulation to not come to fruition. And then it says that the lady who started reading mentioned the department does not make recreation regulations. If this is the case, then who makes the regulation that no motor vehicles can be driven near water holes? Doesn't the department make that regulation, and doesn't that regulation revolve around recreation?
Again, I wasn't around when that rule was created, but again, that is more of an impact that we felt is within our authority because of the physical presence that would have on a water source. If people are physically present on that water, their scent, their smell, their activities could certainly deter wildlife from using that particular water.
Much more so than a trail camera sitting there on a tree.
I would argue yes, because of the.
From Daniel Salea, does the 1/4 mile rule pertain to lakes and isolated creeks or water in the bottom of ravines?
No, it does not. Back to the original definition, it wouldn't include natural waters, rivers, lakes, streams, springs. Again, it's tied to a man-made or developed water source with the primary purpose of providing water for wildlife or livestock.
Another question came in from Austin Atkinson. How does the department intend to define a reasonable statute of time for this regulation? Example, if a camera was placed in calendar year 2017 within 1/4 mile radius of a water source, would it then become illegal to reference those images for a hunt taking place in 2018?
Again, it would be like we would approach any other thing. It would have to be the totality of the circumstances of all the available information. So it's hard to get into the details of those types of scenarios. Yeah. Correct. As that Craig pointed out, if it was lawful before the enaction of the rule, then it would still be lawful, and we still have depending on when this goes live, there will be likely a lot of education prior to starting to actually issue citations for this particular rule. We'll be very conservative on how it's approached.
I don't have any more questions right now.
Okay, and sure, go ahead.
Just real quick, I think you guys need to put that trail cam thing on the table and have a couple more years of discussion. There's just a lot of people opposed to what you guys are trying to do.
Is it the whole trail? I want to clarify. Does it have to do with all of the trail?
The wireless, I'm for it.
Oh, okay, so just to clarify your comment that you feel the department should table the quarter-mile restriction and give it more time and look at it.
Give more time and look at it because there's a lot of interest in this. And I think you're finding that out. I haven't heard one person that's been to you guys yet.
And just to clarify that, as I had mentioned earlier, this is essentially a 5-year process because we have collected comments over the previous 5 years. We've collected comments during our review process. We're collecting comments now. Previously, in the first 5 years when we collected those comments, the vast majority of the comments were wanting some type of restriction. Now, it wasn't specific what that restriction would be, but the vast majority of the previous comments were wanting some type of restriction.
And I think you guys have done that with the wireless thing. I think that's awesome. You've taken a step in the right direction, but the rest of it, there's just too much concern, too much conflict still.
Understood. Understood.
And frankly, I think a game warden should be chasing poachers, not chasing people taking pictures. It's a waste of finite resources.
I think it's important that they understand the Fair Chase Committee, it's not just an internal body.
Yeah, I'll clarify that a little bit more. So it's sort of twofold. So the Arizona Game and Fish Commission owns and approves the policy. But in its development, a Fair Chase Committee was created, and it's made up of a conglomerate of department staff, nonprofit organizations. 2 of our commissioners sit on it, members of the public, members of industry. So there are several entities on it. So these issues have been discussed for a number of years. Do you, Craig, recall when the policy was established? So it's been around for at least 2 years, maybe longer. And again, it was an involved process to write that policy, and the commission ultimately approved it.
I talked to one of those guys that's one of the big guys in that Fair Chase Committee, and when I got done preaching my gospel to him, he's seen it and seen how we could be halfway on something instead of doing this whole thing you guys are dealing with. So I just think it needs to be revisited in a greater way, and anything that's going on, I'll be a part of it and help put my voice to it.
Understood. I think we have that captured. And you have provided previous comments as well, right? Okay, perfect.
I just think it's important that you understand we didn't just dream these things up.
I understand.
This is it was a very long process. Commissioners talked to other commissioners from other states. These folks talked to other people from other states. This is an agreement around the West. It's not, if I'm misspeaking, let me know.
Well, and that's all true, and also what's true is that we're here to collect your comments.
But I just
And
want
so
you to
that,
understand
yeah.
But they say, now, they told me on the Fair Chase, what they're concerned about is the Yankees coming after us and using the cameras against us. But you know what? They're gonna have to attack the whole West. They're gonna have to attack the East too. So now you've got 50 states they're gonna have to attack. Bring it on.
And then just one more clarifying thing is just as far as a matter of the process is, like I mentioned, this was, over 5 years of looking at comments, over a year and a half of our internal staff looking at, all 22 of these rules. We've talked to industry, we talked to lots of people, so this wasn't done in a vacuum. There was a lot of sources that went into developing this proposal. There's been at least 3 to 4 public meetings, at commission meetings, where these proposals were presented to the commission. There has been some edits here and there, but like I said, it's been a long, ongoing, very inclusive process. So like I said, I just don't want to, like we were just sitting in the back room making up some new rules. It was a very long and very complicated process, and we went to a lot of sources to establish it. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
One more comment. Fair chase has been brought up a lot in the last hour. I don't believe fair chase with the air rifle. Fair chase. And you mentioned about other wildlife groups. I was in a meeting on Tuesday with a whole bunch of them, about 32 member groups, and nobody was for the air rifle in the archery season. Fair chase, and it just doesn't seem right,
Let's make sure we got that. Your comment is specific to the fact that the airbow is fair chase during archery only.
Correct.
Okay.
And like I said, I was at a meeting with, there's 32 member groups there. You were there also. After you guys were there, nobody was in favor of the airbow.
Okay.
And then, let me rephrase it. I don't believe anybody was in favor of it, but I think that the vast majority definitely were against it.
Okay, I think we have that. Okay. All right. Well, I certainly appreciate you guys coming down, and like we had said, this is intended to collect your comments and questions. We're not going to solve everything today. Again, it's still an ongoing process, and to your point, it's not final until the commission has approved the language. There could be changes along the way, and also the next process, it goes to the governor's regulatory review council, has to approve it as well. So we still have a ways to go before this becomes final. So again, thank you for your participation. And we do have resources available on our website that you can see the whole package. And we can provide that to you when you leave, and we'll also provide it in a press release so other members that are watching tonight can look at the full package. Thank you.